Good afternoon and welcome to this new debriefing. Today we're going to talk about one of the most famous book with one of the most famous author that we have seen over the last 5 years. The book is called the Pfizer Papers. It's been edited by Naomi Wolf. Pfizer Papers, you all know that we're going to talk about the Pfizer claims regarding the COVID vaccine and so on and so forth. We are in year 5 after the warp speed operation, and I have the pleasure of interviewing the author of the book, Naomi Wolf, Dr. Naomi Wolf, and thank you very much for giving us some of your time.
Thank you.
Naomi Wolf, when you took the time to write such a book, what was the idea behind that? What was your original thought?
Yes, great question. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's so important to bring this information to a European audience, and I'm so honored to be presenting the material today at the European Parliament, the scene of the crime in many ways in Europe. Just like the White House is the scene of the crime in the United States. I've been a feminist nonfiction writer for 40 years, and I've written 8 bestsellers, and my beat is women's well-being of various kinds and civil rights and civil liberties. So I was immediately canceled in 2021 when I posted that women were reporting sustaining menstrual problems upon receiving the mRNA injection. And there was a sort of a weird worldwide campaign to discredit me. So obviously as a journalist, I thought that was interesting, that why is this happening? But subsequently, I continued to be concerned about women's health, and the only platform available to me was Steve Bannon's War Room. I'm a lifelong Democrat. I advised Clinton's re-election campaign, Vice President Gore's campaign. He's obviously a Republican, conservative, but he cared about women and babies, and so did I. And so he prompted me to convene experts to read through and issue reports based on this massive tranche of documents that were being released by the FDA at the behest of a judge after a successful lawsuit against the FDA by lawyer Aaron Siri. The FDA asked the judge to keep the documents hidden for 75 years. The judge did not agree. So we knew this massive amount of documents would be forthcoming. They would be lost to history without expert analysis because they're so technical and so voluminous. So I put out the call to experts, and I was joined under the leadership of my COO, Amy Kelly, by 3,500 doctors and scientists who served humanity for pro bono for 2.5 years, reading through these 450,000 documents and issuing what are now 105 reports. By the way, I'm not the author. It's not my opinion. I'm an editor. Yes, exactly. I helped them turn this very scientific language into language anyone could understand. History.
So it's a major achievement. There was another big book by Robert Kennedy that actually came about Bill Gates and Fauci and the claims where he is actually mentioning some of that. One of the first claim that comes to mind when you read the book is that you allege that Pfizer knew by November 2020 that there was an issue with respect to the performance, that the product they were selling were neither safe nor effective. Are these claims today known by scientists, by politicians, by the people who you're going to speak to in the European Parliament today? Are they recognized, and finally, could we rely on this data?
Well, I very strongly take issue with the premise of your question. I don't allege anything. As I said, this is not my interpretation, it's not my opinion. These reports link to the primary internal documents that Pfizer sent to the FDA as part of the standard process of getting the emergency use authorization and getting these injections into the public starting in November of 2020. So I'm alleging nothing. Pfizer concluded in their own internal documents that the vaccines didn't work to stop COVID. It's not my opinion. Their language was failure of efficacy, quote unquote, and vaccine failure, quote unquote. And in fact, the third most common side effect in the Pfizer documents is COVID. Pfizer had to conceal the deaths, illegally, the deaths of 8 members of the vaccinated cohort who died with COVID and not tell the FDA that this had happened so that they could falsely claim that there was 95% of efficacy. If they had done the math correctly, they would have had to tell the world that you're more likely to be hospitalized and die with the injection, which many other studies have now confirmed. So I just want to stress, none of this is an allegation. I'm not making any claims at all. I'm reporting.
I used that word
I know.
On purpose
I
because
understand.
I thought it was, as a journalist, you're basically explaining, and in fact, what you're saying is that this is what Pfizer is saying.
Pfizer's saying all of it. Okay. Yeah, they concluded that the vaccines don't work to stop COVID, and the documentation of the serious adverse events, the number of people with COVID who are vaccinated, show that it doesn't stop COVID, but it does cause catastrophic side effects, which they've also documented in these internal documents, including nearly 43,000 serious adverse events in just 3 months, which include industrial scale strokes, heart attacks, problems with blood clotting issues, thrombotic thrombocytopenia, florid neurological events, epilepsies, tremors, Guillain-Barré syndromes, brain damage, eye damage, blindness, immune problems, autoimmune disorders, and 1,220 deaths.
And despite of that, regulators, people with authority, politicians, they all went along with, in essence, approving, injecting, coercing individuals to take that shot. And whenever you were trying to ask the science or try to actually invoke common sense or saying, why shouldn't we wait, then you were cancelled. And so you were one of the person that was cancelled. For example, I was one of the person cancelled. Like many other people were cancelled. Everybody who tried to, in fact, be cautious suddenly felt like being cancelled. Now, 5 years down the line, we had a warp speed operation in the US. A few days ago, Donald Trump came about and said, well, let's hope that warp speed was as efficient as it was supposed to be.
That's not exactly what he said. I think he said something much more interesting, as of last night anyway. What he said was that Pfizer, he put the spotlight squarely on Pfizer. And I must say, I think it's interesting that he tweeted that like the day before I'm presenting this information in Parliament. I don't know that he's aware, but Steve Bannon, it's his imprint. So it's possible. I think it's very notable. What he's saying is very serious. And I'm sure Pfizer executives are talking to their lawyers. What President Trump tweeted was that Pfizer had presented different data to him than the data that their internal documentation shows, and that the data they presented to him was fantastic.
And they were inviting Pfizer to present that to everybody, in essence. That's what I believe he actually said that.
Oh, he said exactly. He's asking Pfizer to show the world what they showed the president. And we can presume that these data sets don't align, because if they had shown President Trump this, no one would have okayed it, because this is a massive crime and a slaughter.
We're at a stage in the US where you have Secretary Kennedy, who is HHS Secretary, one of the most powerful person in the US. He's under strong attack with Jay Bhattacharya at the NIH. They're under strong attack in order to get the science back into gold standard science, as Jay Bhattacharya would put it, or to put it in the interest of the American people. I would say the same thing would be in Europe. This battle, which seems to be good against bad, or evil against God, or it seems to be a very, very strong uphill struggle to actually get the science back. How far do you think we are from getting this product off the market?
That's a great question. Well, I guess I'd prefer to look at how far we've come, right? I just reposted a tweet of RFK Jr.'s from October 2024, so nearly a year ago, in which he was endorsing this book. And now he's head of HHS. And in a million years, he was being reviled, and he's crazy, he's an anti-vaxxer. In a million years, if you were placing bets, you would not have bet much that he would be head of HHS right now working with President Trump, a year ago. I'm sitting in the offices of a member of the European Parliament. I just spoke to maybe 60 parliamentarians. I'm going to speak to many more Europeans who are influential journalists and so on in half an hour or an hour. This is progress, right? Now, progress depends on citizens. If citizens listening to this, or citizens who are concerned about the issues that RFK Jr. is raising, just let MEP Anderson or RFK Jr. or Naomi Wolf do all the fighting, we're not going to get far at all. As you see, none of the perpetrators is in prison right now, or even being hauled before courts. But I fully believe that if we keep fighting and the citizens join us and they raise their voices and they demand justice, also in Europe, if they get their electoral processes back, which I believe this institution dramatically undermines, and they get their nations back and their borders back, all of these things are related, then there will be a reckoning. In 1942, people couldn't have foreseen the Nuremberg trials and the Nuremberg law code that followed that said you can never coerce people into getting a medical intervention, which all of these forms of coercion in Europe violated illegally. It's international law that you can't coerce people medically, but the law was violated. So I guess I would say we're in the middle of the battle, and it depends on the people listening.
Probably depends on the media as well, but before I ask the question about the media, I'd like to ask you a question. You mentioned MEP Anderson, who is actually welcoming you, invited you to actually come here. You also mentioned Steve Bannon. These two individuals are coming from a family which is a different political family from your own political family.
Right.
Because you mentioned yourself, you came from a Democrat background, and everybody now who is against Pfizer appears to be being accused of being right-wing, anti-Semites, anti-vaxxers, whatever names you can imagine, they will call you and they will stick them.
Right.
Now, and it's the same for citizens who sometimes fear of being labeled against or being cancelled. How do you feel they should reconcile with the others?
What do you mean reconcile with the others?
How do you feel that the two groups, because in essence one group has decided to be against Pfizer and the other group has decided to be pro-Pfizer. One of them is under influence and the other one appears to be under influence of science or under the influence of, and at one point or another we'll need to actually reconcile the two positions, or the position, for example, of MEP Anderson within the European Parliament who's been sidelined for being anti-vaxxers or anti-Pfizer, anti-science.
Well, I don't agree that these positions need to be reconciled. They're irreconcilable. First, let me answer the first part of your question about the two families, okay? Superficially, I don't agree with probably a number of Steve Bannon's endorsed policies. Superficially, I may not agree with MEP Anderson's, some of her policies. Fundamentally, we're not at all in antagonism to each other. Indeed, we're more profoundly aligned and allies than I am with today's left, for instance. I still call myself a classical liberal, but the fundamental question is, do you support freedom and human rights and individual liberties? And these are like the foundation stones of European and American civilization. So in that she's speaking up for individual liberties, she is more of an ally of mine right now than the DNC, right? And more fundamentally an ally. Same with Steve Bannon. We can have our arguments about abortion or climate change down the road, but right now your democracies and our democracy, yours is at risk and ours has been at risk and can be again, still always is. And, the first thing you do is fight. I mean, I say this often, and you fight with people who are aligned with saving liberty, right? And, let's worry about the lesser issues later. What's really irreconcilable is tyranny and freedom, right? And so at this point, I have nothing in common. They showed, cowards on the left, in my country, cowards on the left in your country, but probably cowards on the right too, and in the center in both countries, showed what they were made of in COVID, right? If they didn't stand up against forced injections or against a two-tier society. And I will always say, I say it over and over, you guys are called whatever, anti-Semites, racists. I laugh in a way because we always have to be careful of anti-Semitism and racism, obviously. But the reason I'm here is that I'm the granddaughter of a woman and a man who lost 8 siblings in the Holocaust. And as a result of that family trauma, I recognize tyranny. And it is very dangerous that in Germany you can't say these things. And if you try to say them, you're trivializing the Holocaust, because this is exactly how the Holocaust started. In fact, if you look at books like The Nazi Doctors or Racial Hygiene, you see that before 1933, in the very beginning of the 30s, the National Socialists enlisted doctors and professional medical organizations to create a discourse of public health that set the stage for separating, the fit from the unfit with later murderous.
There was an enticement for that, yes.
Yes, there was an enticement, but also the doctors were the ones who first separated out mentally damaged teenagers for extermination, right? It was done in the name of public health. And there were health passports, right? Which the same thing you guys were assigned, pass sanitaire, what's it called? The COVID pass. And no one said, hey, we've heard this phrase before. Come on, this is a dangerous history. I mean, we had Jim Crow laws in the US in the 50s, separated out who can drink at what fountain, who can use what, train. And
you
then
can see history rewrite itself.
Of course it's rewriting itself. This is not a metaphor. When I'm told in New York, if I'm not vaccinated, I can't enter a building or enter a restaurant, that goes against the 1964 Civil Rights Act that does away with a two-tier society. So I guess I will just say that that's what's motivating me, is being a student of history and my own being Jewish and recognizing this is how it begins. We've seen this before.
We cannot not talk about the role of the media, especially, for example, when we can see the New York Times going after RFK or Donald Trump for all the actions, where we can see that they are following some form of propaganda. During the Second World War, you just mentioned this, the media also played a big part. How guilty are the media, in your view, at influencing or pushing the policies that were made without criticizing them?
Yeah, well, so every major news outlet in Western Europe, Britain, and North America is guilty because since 2020, they haven't acted like journalists. They abandoned their responsibility as journalists and editors. They didn't ask follow-up questions. When the official spokespeople said it's safe and effective, literally no reporters at Le Monde, at the Telegraph, BBC, New York Times said, show us evidence that what is the basis for you believing that it's safe and effective? Because they don't have it, right? Whatever they showed President Trump, I'm dying to see it too, because that's not what they had. By the time they rolled this out, they knew, how dangerous it was. And again, 3 months into the rollout, Pfizer knew how dangerous it was. So first, they're guilty of committing non-journalism, but they're much guiltier more directly. And I think when there's accountability, a lot of journalists and editors will go to prison. And I'm a free speech advocate, but they colluded very directly. Many news outlets took money in the United States. Certainly, they took money from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to overcome vaccine hesitancy. Didn't disclose it, in their reporting, and then later they took money from the CARES Act, directly funding news outlets. And we have the legal ability for pharma to advertise in the U.S. on media, which you guys don't, which is very bad because there was just a drumbeat of safe and effective, take your shot, and no one was kind of allowed to challenge that because that would be biting the hand that fed them. But Europe is guilty as well, European news outlets, because many of them are directly funded by the state, and they didn't ask questions. The BBC not only didn't ask questions, they colluded in smearing people who were asking questions or discrediting them. Ofcom, I had to be present at a trial in Britain in which Mark Stein, who had been a GB News commentator, he lost his show. He lost, his career in Britain because Ofcom, which is a government censor, really, a media censor, decided that it was upsetting that I was bringing this information to his show, even though it was true. They didn't say it wasn't true. They said it caused distress. So he lost his show. That's guilt. That's guilt. Like, people died and were disabled, and a lot of them showed up at the courthouse in Britain to show themselves as people who had been injured by state propaganda parroted by the BBC, which took Bill Gates millions, The Guardian, and so on. So the press is guilty, and they're guilty right now. Like, why am I talking only to independent news outlets? Why are the usual news outlets who have always interviewed me for 40 years when I come to Europe nowhere to be seen? The major titles, nowhere. The same was true in the Netherlands. The same was true in Iceland. I am so censored. This information is so censored to this day that I physically am being airlifted to the Netherlands, to Brussels, to Iceland, so that I can verbally, like in the Middle Ages, communicate, in a room full of people what is in this material, when it should be freely available, in news outlets, because this is the biggest story of the 20th century. Not about me, just about what was done to millions of people in Europe, and the impact to this day, which is 1 million missing babies in Europe, 13 to 20% drop in live births, and excess deaths off the charts that no one can explain. I can explain it. It's right here in this document. So this is a massive criminal enterprise. It is a scene of mass murder, and the legacy media are certainly criminally implicated.
No, in Europe, we've had a number of litigations, a number of lawsuits. One of them is very famous. It actually targeted Albert Bourla, the CEO of Pfizer, and Ursula von der Leyen. It was actually brought initially by ex-lobbyist Frederick Baldwin. I say ex-lobbyist because he lost his accreditation, and the lawyer Jan Prota. And then it was later joined by Hungary, with two countries, Hungary and Poland, and 1,000 plaintiffs, including pilots, pilots who have the duty of managing their own risks, and therefore they cannot lie to themselves, and they actually investigated the Pfizer documentation. They asked the authorities whether they had conducted specific tests in order to actually know what software they were injecting into themselves. I use the word software, or what formula they were injecting. No response. In fact, they brought a famous lawsuit, which was discarded. Of course, it was cancelled by the media. Nobody wanted to talk about it. Now, isn't it time that you join forces, that the two teams work together on the US side and on the European side? Because you seem to have some information. The lawsuit was about, has Ursula exceeded her own power? What did she negotiate through SMSs? What did she know? Asymmetry of information, undisclosure, non-disclosure. What did they discuss?
Right. Well, our volunteers have actually testified at parliaments around the world. They've testified to Australian Parliament twice. I testified to two members of the Australian Parliament. They spoke to the British Parliament, Canadian parliamentarians. So they'll go wherever they're asked. We'll go wherever we're asked. And this is, published, so they can order it and use it in trials. It's been used.
But testimony is sometimes more important than just the written document.
Sure, I'll go wherever I'm told. And they're welcome to contact me. I'd be honored to help. I guess the challenge there is that this body of evidence is just what was in the custody of the FDA. So really what you need is a lawsuit against the European Medicines Agency,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. EMEA.
And to subpoena Ursula von der Leyen's communications, which I assume this lawsuit did. I don't know the status of the lawsuit, but if presenting this information is helpful, which I assume it is, because Borla would have known, and he's part of the cover-up, I'm happy to join forces. I mean, one of the challenges is funding. It's very expensive to do a project like this.
But at the end of the day, the citizens want to know the truth. Maybe they'll be ready to actually finance that fund.
I stand by. We stand by to help. Just let us know what we can do to help.
Naomi Wolf, I've taken a lot of your time for this, to talk about this. I just want to mention that there is a French version of your book that was published by Marco Pieter's edition. It's actually readily available since July. Mm-hmm. So at least for the viewers, if they want to actually read that, in the write-up, I'll put the sort of URLs, because not everybody in Europe speak English. At least there's some version. It's my usual habit to leave my invitee to have the final word. Is there one thing I've missed, or is there something you'd like to say?
Well, thank you for asking. I didn't really delve into the centerpiece, which is, again, the reproductive damage. So that's what I would like to stress, that the goal of the Pfizer documents, it was focused on ruining human reproduction, and that's what happened. That's where we're at.
And we're seeing the numbers because there's a lot of studies. I think Vibeke Manish, the Danish doctor, there's a Czech data. Of course, there's a lot of
Hungarian data.
And ACIP in the US is actually tasked with looking at some of these, because of course there's a big reproductive issue even in the US. So it's become a worldwide issue. Yeah.
Well, if they had let me speak 3 years ago, we might have averted some of this catastrophe, but they were determined not to. So now it's our turn.
In France, there was also a group called Where is My Cycle, Where is My Period, that actually came together because it was very early on in 2021. It was identified, but of course it was cancelled. It was not actually mentioned in the media. So it's something that we have observed. We've mentioned this into our paper too. So all of this, what you've observed, we've observed. We tried to speak about it, but it actually didn't reach the audience, or at least the broader audience, and at least now you have the chance to do that in the Parliament. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much. Thanks for coming out to speak with me. Thank you.